Next, I'm going to explain a little bit more about moving, cloning, rotating, and scaling. Alright, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to just isolate the pyramid to just show you here. So I'm going to just zoom to selection, and I'm going to use the move tool here. Okay, let me just expand the view here. Now move tool, essentially when we highlight over, this is called the object pivot, or it's called the gizmo as well. Alright, so when you notice, when we mouse over any one of these axes here, it will be constrained to this particular axis. Like for example, right now I'm dragging along the x-axis, it is constrained along the x-axis only. Alright, if I were to highlight over the z-axis now and drag, I will be moving along a constrained z-axis only. However, if I were to mouse over the box down here, this little box region here, this one. Alright, if I were to mouse over this, you will notice now that it becomes yellow all throughout here. That means I will be able to move in these two axes constraints here. Okay, so at any one time, Max would allow us to move in along two axes only, never in three axis mode here. Okay, because then it will be quite uncontrollable in that sense. Alright, so that's how essentially moving would work here. Remember earlier on, if we use the right click on if we were to right click on the command, we can call out the move transform type in. This move transform type in will allow us to, let's pay attention to the offset screen here. Okay, it will allow us to move things in a precise manner, either by dragging the spinners or keying in precise numbers. For example, I can key in exactly 1000 units, which is in this case 1 meter, and it will move precisely by 1 meter here. And if I want to move it backwards, I will use minus 1000, enter, and then I will be able to move it precisely by 1 meter also. So that's pretty much how move will work in that sense. Rotate is quite similar as well. So let's go ahead and click on the rotate tool. And if you look at rotate now, you find that whichever axis that is being highlighted will be in yellow. And generally, we can mouse over one of these axes and rotate along. So in this case, I'm rotating along the z-axis, and doing this way, highlighting over the x-axis here. Let me show you in more detail. You see, notice here, this red line down here is what we call the x-axis here. Alright, it's x-axis, and it is highlighted here this way. Okay, so therefore if I do this, and then it will rotate this way like that, and obviously then the green line will be along the y-axis. So if you notice here, generally the lines are pretty color specific. Like for example, it's a bit hard to see, but it's actually green colored lines here. If you don't highlight over this particular line, it's actually green color, so it's along the y-axis down here as well, this way. And for rotation, we can rotate it along multiple axes like that, but again then it makes it a little bit hard to control also. Like the move command, we can right click to call out the rotate transform type in, so we can rotate the object around its absolute coordinates here, or we can use offset angles. Like for example, along the z-axis, I'm going to change it for example to 45 degrees and then keep adding 45 degrees. Notice here, if I add another 45 degrees here, this will become 135 instead of here. So there is a difference, okay? Offset screen. So notice here now is 135. If I keep adding another 45, 45, 45, 45. Alright, it will come back to one full circle this way. Next, I'm going to talk about scaling. So scaling, again, we can constrain it to scale along one axis this way, or X or Y axis this way, or we can constrain it to two axes this way, or we can constrain it along the Y and Z axis this way, like that. Okay, or we can don't constrain. That means this one can be done to three axes all together to form a uniform scale function. And again, we can right click on the scale command to call out the scale transform type in. We can arbitrarily really change any one of this axis here, this way, or this way, or we can do a uniform scale here, depending on whether we want to use the spinners or we want to do this one precisely like that. Alright. Next part I'm going to touch on will be on the part on cloning or copying. Most of us are quite familiar with using the Microsoft Word. So you know, in using computers, there is always that shortcut key Control X, Control C and Control V. So Control X usually refers to cut, and Control C usually refers to copy, and Control V usually refers to paste. In 3D Studio Max, all we need to do is we can select the element itself. Let me change this to move command first. We would select this element or select the item or object that we want to manipulate or to clone, and then we will simply just use either edit, clone, or you see this shortcut key here, we can just simply use Control V. Control V will allow us to clone an object with the three options here. Either to become a copy, to become an instance, or to become a reference. So let me do all three to show you what the key differences are. So I'm going to make a copy first, a clone copy, and I'm going to move it here. And then I'll go back to selecting the same pyramid now and clone, Control V, and I'm going to make an instance here. So I'm going to move this one aside, and I'm going to go back and clone one more time as a reference here. They will all look the same. However, there are certain key differences in which I would like to highlight to you here. Now, this being the original itself, we will talk about how to work on the modifications later. I just want you to know and to remember the difference, okay? Let me go to modify and make some change to this. I'm going to make a little bit of a change to the geometry now. So would you notice the difference if I were to pull this one out? Notice now when I manipulate this pyramid, the copy here will not be affected, but the instance here will be, and the reference here will be as well, like that. Alright, so this is what happens when you clone instance and you clone a reference. Alright, essentially whatever you do to the instance or the original, okay, what I'm going to do is I'm going to select the instance now and manipulate it further, just to demonstrate to you what the difference is. Now, for example, right now, if I were to add on another modifier to change it, notice now if I manipulate the instance, the original will be affected and the reference will also be affected. Okay. Lastly, I'm going to manipulate the reference here. Notice here in a reference there is an extra bar down here, this little bar down here. This little bar would give us a visual clue that this item here is actually a reference object. Now if you notice here also, a clone object usually would have had the text here in bold, this one, compared to the original copy down here. If this is an uncloned unit or unreferenced or uncloned unit, the text here will not appear in bold. So let's go back to reference here. Now if I were to add on another modifier to change here, now notice for a reference, if I were to make a change now, it will not be affected. That means it, although is in a way a copy of an original, but then a reference object can be further processed or manipulated without affecting the original or the instance copies this way.